This is one of the darkest truths of modern history. For America, war was never merely a matter of survival, justice, or freedom. War was always but always about money. Every conflict was not just a front where guns and soldiers clashed. It was also a stage where financial opportunities were showcased. While ordinary people sent their sons to the front and families endured hard times by sharing their food, the silent wheels of the financial world were turning blood into money. America didn't just wage wars, it learned how to monetize them. And this formed the foundation of the global financial system we live in today. To understand this, one must go back to the First World War in 1914. Initially, the U.S. did not directly get involved in the war. It was Europe that was losing the blood. Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary. They were all exhausting themselves in terms of both manpower and economic resources. Millions of soldiers, millions of shells. As state treasuries emptied rapidly, America saw its first major opportunity. From across the Atlantic, American industry and banks became the arsenal and credit center of Europe. Wall Street giants like J.P. Morgan made unprecedented deals with Britain and France. Morgan single-handedly organized billions of dollars in loans and transformed into the de facto purchasing agent for these countries. American wheat, steel, coal, and munitions flowed ceaselessly into Europe. The billions of dollars of that era represented a power incomparably larger than today's, and all the money was tied to interest. Every shell exploding on the Western Front meant not just TNT, but a debt written to American financiers. The U.S. officially joined the war in 1917, but by that point the financial system was already tied to the outcome of the war. If Britain and France lost, Wall Street would go under. Thus, the line between national security and financial interest was almost completely erased. Ordinary Americans, meanwhile, were told to buy Liberty bonds as a patriotic duty, bonds issued to lend money to the state. In propaganda posters, Uncle Sam pointed his finger saying, "I want you." Celebrities called for bond purchases, and even children saved their coins for thrift stamps. For the first time, an entire nation was financially mobilized for war. But the dark side of the matter was this. While ordinary people contributed a few dollars, the real winners were the bankers and industrialists at the top. Factories were running at full capacity, and profits were breaking records. J.P. Morgan's influence over governments had reached unprecedented dimensions, and a new precedent was set. War could be financed not just by gold or taxes, but by debt sold to the public, that is, by financial instruments. This mechanism never disappeared. In the Second World War, the same model was perfected on a much larger scale. Again, Europe was dragged into chaos. Again, American industry stepped in. Roosevelt declared that America would be the arsenal of democracy. Even before the U.S. formally entered the war, factories were producing ships, planes, tanks, and munitions at full capacity. The financing machine was working with the same speed. The Treasury issued war bonds and the Federal Reserve backed them. Over 85 million Americans purchased war bonds, raising $185 billion. This was more than half the total cost of the war. The system had now fully learned the formula. Package sacrifice as an investment and turn the citizen into the government's lender. Meanwhile, companies like Boeing, General Motors, and Ford switched to military production and received profit-guaranteed contracts. The state provided the money, factories produced the weapons, and shareholders filled their coffers. The bond between money and power became stronger than ever before. War was no longer just a tragedy. It was also an economic engine. Then a silent but revolutionary change occurred, the collapse of the gold standard. During the war, the U.S. suspended convertibility to gold. The dollar was now the representative not of gold, but of the power of the American state, its industry, and most importantly, its army. With Bretton Woods in 1944, the dollar officially became the world's reserve currency. The war that destroyed Europe carried America to the peak in both a military and financial sense. The war machine was now not only a military machine but an economic one. And the story did not end in 1945. The ensuing Cold War was a financial struggle as much as a political one. Military expenditures increased. Sectors like aviation, electronics, and oil were fed by massive defense budgets. Economists called this military Keynesianism. War spending was keeping the economy afloat. Consequently, war ceased to be an opportunity and turned into a structural part of the financial system. And the truly disturbing truth is this: as long as war spending yields profit, the incentive for new conflicts will always exist. Defense companies win, banks win, politicians win. The ordinary citizen pays the price through inflation, taxes, and debt. By the time Vietnam came around in the 1960s, the model was fully established. The Vietnam War cost the U.S. over $100 billion. Despite human losses and military failure, the financial world continued to gain. The most visible result of this was inflation. They tried to finance guns and butter simultaneously, but the economy could not sustain it. In 1971, Nixon completely abolished the gold standard. The dollar stood tall, not on metal, but on trust in the state and the power of the military. Vietnam changed not just geopolitics, but the nature of money. With the oil crises of the 1970s, the petrodollar system was established. Oil would be priced only in dollars. The U.S. military presence in the Middle East secured this system. Money and war were no longer two separate issues, they were intertwined. During the Gulf War in 1991, defense companies earned massive figures. The war was broadcast live, and simultaneously, the stock values of these companies rose. War had virtually turned into a technology showcase. Coming to the 21st century, the era of 9/11 and the war on terror began. This was the peak of war financing. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq cost the U.S. $6 trillion. This money could have created free education, infrastructure, and a healthcare system for generations. But it went to the war machine. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Halliburton became giants. The financial mechanism remained unchanged. Bonds were issued, interest rates were kept low, debt was expanded, and the burden again fell on the public. The irony is that America does not win most of these wars. Vietnam was lost, Iraq collapsed, Afghanistan was exited in haste. But financially, the wars were never lost. Contracts were paid, debt returned, interest accrued. Profit continued even if combat ended on the front. As for today, the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about in 1961 is now an integral part of the American financial system. Defense spending is over $800 billion. Wall Street feeds on this, politicians harvest votes, and the system reproduces itself. What does this mean? The money in your pocket, the inflation you feel at the grocery store, the taxes reflected in your salary. They are all parts of a system where war has become financialized. The machine works even if bombs aren't falling. What we saw during the 2008 crisis and the pandemic was the same. The state issues debt, corporations are protected, and ordinary people pay the bill. Methods used during wartime have now become the normal of peacetime, and the most disturbing truth is this. When you understand this system, you realize that conflict and crisis are not exceptions for the system. They are a feature, an opportunity. Turbulence feeds the financial system because it creates dependency. The real enemy is often not on the front lines, it is hidden inside the balance sheets. That is why true financial education requires learning not just budgeting or investment tools, but understanding the real mechanics of the system. History clearly shows how money and power are intertwined. In every major conflict alongside ideology, there are serious financial interests. The next time you hear calls for war, see defense budgets rise, or notice prices increasing at the market, do not just ask, who is the enemy? Ask, who profits from this?